afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Swire, and I'd like to show you how to construct a bomb. This is for purposes of demonstration only. Please don't try this at home. It's not any bomb. This is going to be a barometrically timed device, similar to the one that may have been used on PanAm 103 that exploded over Lockerbie in December 1988. Built beside a Toshiba cassette radio player, the sort of thing you see being carried around a lot in the 1980s, disturbing the peace. Front off, and as you can see, the tape head section is removed, and in its place 3 alien components fitted. First of all, a timer, it's a barometric timer, in other words, one that is designed to be activated when a plane reaches cruising altitude, 31,000 feet, which usually takes about 8 minutes of climbing to achieve. Once activated, that will tick away for 30 minutes, and then trigger the detonator here, one of these, which will then cause the high explosive package here, in this case Semtex, to explode, causing a blast which, if placed in a hard shell suitcase in the hold of a 747 airplane, will punch a small hole in the skin of the aircraft, leading to immediate loss of pressure in the cabin and the immediate breakup and loss of the aircraft and all its occupants. Of course, at that altitude, 5 miles up, it would be impossible for anyone to survive, although, as we know, some people might remain conscious and aware of what's happening to them as the aircraft disintegrates and falls with them to the earth far below. Very easy to construct, and very easy to smuggle on board an airplane as well. I know because I did it. In 1990 this was, an attempt by me to test whether what are laughingly called security procedures at our airports were fit for purpose. I actually wanted to be caught, you see. I was hoping that I wouldn't pass through the system undetected. And I was indeed taking it on a 747 from Heathrow to JFK, New York. Sure enough, as I walked through security at Heathrow, an officer took me aside. Said, what have we here then? I thought, good man, go on, go on. You intending taking this machine aboard the aircraft, sir? I said, yes. He said, with the batteries still in, sir? I said, oh, yes, of course. How silly of me, I'm sorry. He said, yes, well, be more careful next time, sir. Enjoy your flight. Next! And on board the flight, I went with my bomb, which, if all had gone according to plan, would have exploded approximately 38 minutes later, as the plane would have been banking westward towards the Irish Sea, somewhere over the north of England or the Scottish borders. Just as well that it wasn't real Semtex. Marzipan. Made a lot of enemies with that stunt. It was called irresponsible, reprehensible, driven mad with grief, all that sort of thing. But you see, I made my point. They really should have done better than that. Because, you see, they've been warned to be on the lookout for exactly this kind of device since at least November 1988, when all British airline security managers were given exact details of this kind of bomb built inside a Toshiba cassette player, with another warning following that about a month later from German intelligence, this time with photographs. So who would want to make such an evil device, whose only use could be to cause maximum death and destruction? And where did the information in these very explicit warnings come from? Well, the reason the authorities had all this information and were able to warn embassy staff and other important people to beware of travelling on so-called high-risk flights was because of the arrest in October 1988 in Operation Autumn Leaves of 14 members of a Syrian-backed terror group, the PFLP-GC, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. Catchy name, isn't it? Run by a nice gentleman called Ahmed Jibril, with other gang members including Marwan Kresat, who was the master bomb maker of the unit, Jordanian Atlas Dalkamoni, and a mysterious figure by the name of Abu Ilyas, which sounds rather like an alias, doesn't it? And he was an expert in airport security and had details of how to get the bomb onto an aircraft. Arrested from the flat in Neuss, West Germany, a bomb-making factory with all the components needed for making the bomb, and 4 of these devices. Although actually, it turned out that Marwan Creasett made 5 of these. But one of them disappeared from his workbench the day before the raids and was passed by another person, thought to be Al-Megrahi, to someone else who slipped the net. So, with all this, to say the least, incriminating evidence, it should have been a simple matter to prosecute these highly dangerous men, you would have thought. But, as we now know, Marwan Creasett was a double agent, a spy for the Jordanian Secret Service, an organization very closely supported by the CIA. He made a phone call from the police station in Germany to his Secret Service minder in Jordan, and lo and behold, the whole gang were released without charge. No suspicion of a crime, said the German judge. Justice is when you know the right people. So this group were the ones making these malevolent devices, the ones pictured in the warnings, or as it turned out, a very special client, Iran. Now the Iranians were out for revenge, you see. In July 1988, a US warship, the Benson, sailing in the Persian Gulf, shot down Iran Air 655 with 290 people on board, mostly pilgrims en route to Mecca, men, women, and 66 children. There were, of course, no survivors. As it turned out, there was a television crew on board the Benson when this attack took place.
Oh, shit! Yeah. We had it, bro. That's shit on!
President Reagan claimed self-defense. Well, you see, the Benson was sailing in Iranian waters at the time and was expecting to be attacked. As a matter of fact, the military came up with a rather snappy name to explain why these chaps did what they did. Scenario fulfillment. A, quote, simultaneous psychological condition amongst 18 members of the crew, said to occur when men are under pressure. In such a situation, men will carry out a training exercise, believing it to be reality, while ignoring sensory information that contradicts the scenario. In this incident, the scenario was an attack by a lone military aircraft. I'm sure it was a great comfort to all the relatives of those blasted out of the sky to know that the killers were suffering from mass psychosis. Maybe that's why instead of being punished, they were decorated, promoted, and given a hero's welcome. One might also note that there have been no international calls for justice for the Iranian victims. So maybe in the absence of justice, for some, revenge is all they feel they have left. So, a well-backed-up theory of an Iranian plot to blow up an American aircraft with lots of hard, actionable evidence to support it, including payment of $11 million by the Iranians to the PFLPGC 2 days after the Lockerbie attack, further payment of $500,000 to one Abu Talb, a terrorist whom we shall meet later, citation of honor to Al-Megrahi, proclaiming our greatest strike against the West, and plenty of warnings given. Although, sadly, tragically, none received by the passengers and crew of PanAm 103, which exploded, and it was en route to New York. Took off half an hour late from Heathrow, 6:30 on the 21st of December 1988, and descended 38 minutes later on the peaceful Scottish border town of Lockerbie and surrounding areas. And I think at this point I should probably declare my interest. My lovely, gifted, wonderful daughter, Flora, was on the flight. The anger and grief which I felt at her passing, I still feel today very, very intensely, 22 years later. Of course, grief and anger for different people in different ways. When I first heard the news about Flora, it was shock, denial, as we say now, disbelief, there were lots of practical things beginning on with, funerals, her room in London to be cleared out, where heartbreakingly we found on her desk a newly opened letter telling her that she'd just been accepted to do her master's in neurology at Cambridge, where I studied myself, and we were sure that she was saving that as a Christmas present for us. That she was going to call us up from New York on Christmas Day, where she got to stay with her boyfriend Hart and say, Dad, Mum, wonderful news. And of course that would have been the best Christmas present we could have had. I mean, we would have been just absolutely over the moon. It was just a few days before Christmas, actually, 21st December 1988. I was at home in the kitchen in Bromsgrove, as usual, tinkering away, this time making a calendar. I was making a family calendar with photos of all the family members carefully pasted into a design which hopefully wouldn't be too much of an eyesore for all those family members compelled to have their kitchen wall for a year, or at least when we came round. And I was, of course, thinking about Flora. Well, you know, you can never really relax until you know that they're back safely on the ground, and her sister had kissed her goodbye at Heathrow, and off she'd gone to check in for her 6 p.m. flight to New York. I imagined her settling down under the flight blanket, you know, the way you do on those overnight transatlantic flights. And air stewardess is coming round, making sure that everybody's comfortably on this unusually quiet flight. It's strange because normally just for Christmas these flights are completely booked out, but this one had a lot of late cancellations, and Flora was able to get a last minute ticket for it quite easily. So there I was in the kitchen, tinkering away, making this calendar, and suddenly Jane called through from the living room. Jim! Jim! A plane down! An airliner!
A PanAm 747 jumbo jet with 255 people on board has crashed just north of the Scottish border.
Oh,
there's an emergency telephone number in America. It's 0101 212 880 1234. PanAm flight PA-103 took off from London Heathrow, bound for John F. Kennedy Airport in New York at 6:25 this evening. Radar contact was lost at 7:19. The plane came down in the town of Lockerbie in Dumfriesshire. It crashed into a petrol station and a number of houses. Eyewitnesses...
Gage. Well, there's be hundreds of people trying to get through at the moment. Come on, read on. Look, don't worry, darling. I'm sure she wasn't on that one. I mean, there must have been dozens of planes in that airspace at that time. The chances that she was on that one are very remote. I'm sure... What time did they say the plane took off? 6:30. Well, there you are. The plane was 6, so... Come on. And it should be way beyond Lockerbie by now. They'll be way over the Irish Sea by this time. Come on.
Good evening. A Pan-American Boeing 747 airliner flying from London to New York crashed tonight in the Scottish borders. The company says that Pan American Flight 103 had more than 250 people on board, and a report in the last few seconds from Heathrow Airport says there were 258 people, 255 adults and 3 children on board. It came down on the village of Lockerbie in Dumfriesshire, 15 miles north of the Scottish border. Flight 103 left Heathrow at 6 o'clock this evening, bound for John F. Kennedy Airport, New York. At 7 o'clock, it disappeared from the radar screens at Prestwick Air Traffic Control Centre. It crashed on...
Come on, damn you! Look, if you've got the number for PanAm, I'll try and direct. It's better to go direct. What is it? Well, of course, they're bound to have computers with lists of who was on the flight and who wasn't on the flight, and should be able to tell us what the hell happened. Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Well, sorry, there's so much noise at your end. I know that I'm in the same position. I have a horrible feeling my daughter, Flora Swire, may have been on the plane that's come down. Yes, I know. Yes, I understand. You're not showing with all your computers. Hello? We watched the footage in disbelief. I was trying to phone every few seconds, and then suddenly at 4 o'clock in the morning. Hello. Yes, Hannah. Yes, speaking. Yes, that's my address. Yes. Yes. Flora Biddulph, Margaret Swire, yes, that's right, yes. She was. I see. No survivors, yes, thank you. Well, thank you very much. Yes, thank you for letting me know. 2 weeks passed, January the 4th, memorial service at Lockerbie Parish Church. Up we drove, done with grief. But first of all, I had a little detour to make. See my daughter, Flora. So the Lord Advocate, Peter Fraser, had decreed that none of the Lockerbie relatives would be allowed to see the remains of their loved ones. No discussion, end of subject. Thus denying them one of the most psychologically important rights that anyone can go through in coming to terms with the death of a loved one, seeing them dead, saying goodbye. Looking back on it, I suppose this was the first of many times that I was to defy authority and say, no, I'm going to do this my way, Daniel. And through all the terrors and strains of the years that followed, it's this moment that I return to in my memory to remind me that nothing is so important to me as to find out who did that to my lovely daughter and to see them brought to justice. I used my influence as a general practitioner on the pathologist working at Lockerbie Ice Rink, the only building large enough in town to hold all the dead. Walked in through those doors, heard them slam shut behind me and echo across the silent hall, with bodies shrouded on wooden pallets laid out across the ice. And I was led into a small room off the ice rink, full of flowers to mask the stench of death. And there she was, laid out on a table covered in a white sheet. Were there any identifying marks on the body? Yes, she had a mole on her right big toe. Quick look. Identity confirmed. You very kindly let me alone with her for a couple of minutes. I can't describe that moment, I'm sorry, I don't have the words for that. Anyway, he came back in again. A few moments later, a pair of scissors, and I wanted a lock of her hair. Yes. Then he pulled the sheet back, and that's when I saw my lovely daughter's face, puffed up from the decompression, flattened by the impact. My poor baby. Part of her head was missing, which in time at least gave me comfort because it suggested that she'd been killed outright when the plane broke up and didn't fall conscious as some must have done. Thank you. And then all of a sudden, what the fuck are you doing in here? Who let you in? I said, I'm sorry, officer. I'm just visiting. I've come to identify my daughter's body. Right, well, you're not going anywhere till you sign this. Sorry, pal, I can't have people running in out of here whenever they feel like there were dead bodies all over the place. Right, on you go. To town hall, huge crowd packed in, dazed and stricken faces, tea and biscuits. We sort of understand each other in a way. We don't need to say very much. We just know. Mrs. Thatcher, of course, saying all the right things. We're devastated, our deepest condolences. Just a quick word about Mrs. Thatcher, nothing personal, but stuff about the Iron Lady on her chariot of fire, defending the rights and interests of British people. She never once agreed to meet us, the UK relatives. She blocked an inquiry. And in 1994, when her massive autobiography came out, just 5 years after the bombing, dense with recollection on about everything that ever happened to her, nothing on the Lockerbie bomb. Nothing. 914 pages. Just one line in the chronology at the back. December 21st, Lockerbie bombing. That's it. The worst terrorist atrocity in UK history happened on her watch. We wrote to her, we asked her why, and she wrote back, she said, we wish to add nothing to the text. I mean, what can possibly explain such an unbelievable omission? There was a story in the Washington Post that came out in 1990, which said that in March 1989, just 3 months after the bombing, President Bush had called Mrs. Thatcher and asked her to, quote, cool it on the Iranian connection to Lockerbie, which is one promise she certainly kept to the end. It's all politics, of course. They were going after Saddam Hussein at the time. They needed Iran and Syria on side. This is when we still did coalitions in the women. So maybe she thought, yes, it's in the best interests of all of us if truth and justice are sacrificed in this case. Or maybe if the Iron Lady could have seen my daughter as I did that last time, it would have melted her heart. As it is, I'm haunted forever by that moment and by the terrible waking nightmare that comes to me, usually totally unexpectedly. I can see her, Flora, on the plane. I always see her already asleep. You see, deep in her last dream. Of course, she may have already made some friends. She may have one who was awake. I don't know. I mean, she may have found someone who needed calming down and reassurance, who was making them laugh, quite likely. But I just can't bear to think of her still awake at that moment, 38 minutes after takeoff. So began all the years of campaigning, letter writing, waiting for new clues to turn up, arrests to be made, new evidence to show up. Finally, in late 1990, we had the fatal accident inquiry here in Scotland. We were very fortunate, the UK Relatives Group, to be approached by a team of lawyers who offered us their services free of charge. But all we found out at the end of this inquiry was that on the 21st of December 1988, 259 passengers and crew and 11 people living in the town of Lockerbie were murdered by use of a cassette radio bomb, and that no one of the British government or the British Airline Security Services could be held responsible for anything that occurred. So thank you very much for that. One curious aspect of this fatal accident inquiry was that the police absolutely, totally denied that any drugs had been found at the scene of the crime, whereas we in the families group knew of a farmer from Tundergarth Mains who had reported finding a suitcase full of white powder, clearly heroin, amongst some brambles on his land. He had called up the Lockerbie police. They had arrived very swiftly with a, quote, very angry American gentleman. He had then taken this suitcase away, which of course in itself was a crime because it was evidence from a crime scene. It was never seen again or mentioned at the trial. Now, strangely, these lawyers representing us refused to ask any questions about this. They refused to call this farmer as a witness, even though we plead with them to do so. They actually got quite shirty with us, and eventually referred us to the Lord Advocate, Peter Fraser, who told us that the farmer had been re-interviewed and had nothing to say about any drugs find. So in other words, thank you very much, go away and stop asking questions. Then we discovered that these lawyers were being paid by the Department of Transport, who clearly had a great interest in shifting attention away from their own airport security procedures and blaming foreign airports, which to me still doesn't wash, because it effectively means that you are trusting foreign airport security, and that could be Iranian, Afghan, Korean, Moroccan, Saudi, or even Libyan airports, to look for suspicious items so that you don't have to. And that should be of concern to anybody who gets on a flight from a UK airport or lives under the flight path of one. Now, maybe the Department of Transport didn't wish to draw our attention to a long-running program by the US Drugs Enforcement Agency, whereby suitcases full of heroin were carried regularly by special couriers on PanAm flights from the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon back to the United States for, we are told, drug sting operations, with airport security informed and turning a blind eye. Controlled operations, they called it. Perhaps they thought that PanAm customers might be disturbed to think that there were suitcases full of heroin in the hold of the plane. Maybe this explains why Lockerbie was packed, crowded full of Americans wearing FBI baseball caps not 2 hours after the plane came down, searching for something. However, there was one fascinating revelation that came out of the fatal accident inquiry. A Heathrow baggage handler, John Bedford, told the court that he had left luggage container AVE 4041, later identified as the one which contained the case with the bomb in it, left it waiting to be loaded onto PanAm 103 for 35 minutes unattended on the tarmac while he went for a tea break. When he came back, there were 2 hard-shell suitcases sitting on top of the other luggage, placed there by person or persons unknown. Now remember, this interline shed where the cases were all waiting was directly adjacent to the PanAm and Iran Air hangars and was accessible to anybody who wanted to get to it. So nobody watching, no checks, but 35 minutes. So those suitcases were loaded onto the aeroplane on the very baggage container from which it is now acknowledged the explosion which killed my daughter emanated. John Bedford's testimony was dismissed as irrelevant. There was also, we now know, found out years later, a break-in at Heathrow the night before the bombing. The padlock, professionally cut through by person or persons unknown, giving access to the baggage area to anyone who wanted it. This was properly reported to airport security by an airport security manager, Mr. Raymond Manley. Reports made out, the police informed, but unfortunately we weren't told this at the fatal accident inquiry or at the subsequent trial. I mean, you just simply have to ask, why not? Anyway, I hope I've given you a fairly detailed picture of much of the evidence which seems to support the theory that the PFLPG were probably the ones who perpetrated this crime. There's an awful lot more, but we've got limited time, and I suspect you may already be suffering from information overload. But those are the main planks of the inquiry up until November 1991. Then, all of a sudden, we were plunged into this whole new world. A completely new story, totally unconnected with all this, suddenly emerged. 2 Libyan suspects have been identified.
The 2 accused are Abdul Basit Ali Muhammad Al-Megrahi and Al-Amin Khalifa Fima.
That the investigation has come to this conclusion is not a surprise. We are now actively considering what actions to take.
We have no evidence to implicate another country in this disaster.
I understand the investigation has revealed no evidence to support suggestion of involvement by other countries.
Lord Advocate, Peter Fraser, was quoted as saying, "We have witnesses who will prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt." So certainly it was a total surprise, but I mean, I was delighted. I thought, well, so maybe we've been pursuing a phantom for the last 2 years, but now, at last, we have a possibility of some truth and justice for our loved ones. I suppose, by the way, I should tell you about the time I went to meet Colonel Gaddafi, shouldn't I? December 1991, this was. The indictments had been issued against these 2 Libyans, but nothing was happening. It was this complete stalemate. Gaddafi didn't feel that they would get a fair trial in the US or the UK, and he wanted them tried in Libya under Libyan law. So I was talking to an Egyptian journalist friend of mine, Nabil, and he said to me, well, why don't you go and see him? He said, He said, I could arrange it all. I could come over as your guide and interpreter. He said, maybe you could move Gaddafi in a way that a diplomat couldn't. So I think back to the ice rink in Lockerbie. And I said, yes, why not? So the pair of us flew out, absolutely terrified, I don't mind telling you. Arrived into Tripoli into searing heat. And ahead of us at the airport, huge battery of cameramen and news reporters. I said to Nabil, I said, look, get rid of them or I'm out of there, you understand? He went and had a quick word with them, and in 1 minute, the whole lot were gone. I thought, my gosh, Libyan journalists are almost as good, well, even more compliant than our lot, I thought. And the next day, I meet him with the man with whom I hoped, in sheer naivety, as some think, perhaps, still think today, with whom I hope to form a link as a grieving father. Because you see, President Reagan had launched airstrikes on Libya in 1986 from UK airfields, thanks to Mr. Thatcher, with the intention of killing Gaddafi, but unfortunately had only succeeded in killing 40 innocents, including Gaddafi's 18-month-old adopted daughter, Hannah, in her bedroom. Now, of course, I know he's a monster. He's a dictator. He's been responsible for all sorts of terrible things. Torture, assassination, all the sort of things we do so well. But I just thought that if I could make an emotional link with him, you see, as a father who's lost a child in terrible, horrific circumstances, and presumably understands these feelings of grief, then maybe, just maybe, I can slightly nudge him towards making these two suspects available to a Scottish court in a neutral country so that we can at last have some prospect of truth and justice. I was going to do a little tour of the ruined palace and was shown the child's bedroom, a little tiny room with shrapnel holes in the wall and a little shrine of photographs to the lost child in the corner. And then I was allowed into the inner sanctum, the lair of the devil himself, Gaddafi's underground bunker, which actually was made up rather like something Lawrence of Arabia, so an underground tent. And all around us in the half shadows, bodyguards with submachine guns cocked at the ready. All these eyes looking at me. All women, sure. And then suddenly there he was, dressed in green flowing robes, the demon prince. He said, Dr. Swire, you are most welcome. I hope you are enjoying your stay in Tripoli. I said, well, actually, yes. I said, I'm rather scared of meeting you, sir, as a matter of fact, but there you go, it looks like you might be rather scared of meeting me, too. I thought, God, why did you say that? Bloody fool. This man may have killed Flora. So I regretted saying it, but he smiled, thank goodness, and we talked for about an hour about all aspects of the case. He initially sticking to his insistence that the suspects must be tried in Libya under Libyan law, and me telling him to his face that this would never be accepted by the international community, and his only option was a trial under Scottish law. I went to great lengths to reassure him of the excellence of Scottish justice. We ended the meeting on very good terms. I gave him a copy of a book by my mother, written about the Isle of Skye, and an album of photographs of Flora. Dr. Swire, I would like to present you with a copy of my book. It is my own philosophy. I hope you will accept it as a gift of friendship. And Dr. Swire, I'd like to give you a copy also of our holy book, which is a great treasure. And Dr. Swire, this photograph of your lovely daughter Flora, I would like to place it beside the photograph of my own daughter Hannah in the room where she was killed on that terrible night. I said, well, yes, thank you very much. I said, one more thing, sir, just one more thing. I reached into my briefcase and at once heard the click of half a dozen AK-47s all around the room. And I said, sir, this will tell you why I'm here. what we go through for love. So, after that followed years and years of waiting. Gaddafi agreed to a trial under Scottish law in a neutral country, something that was welcomed by all parties except the US and UK governments. And, see, one problem was that there was so much wrangling about the form of the trial, where it should sit, where it should be held, how it should be composed, that you almost felt as if they were stringing it out, you know, just hoping that we'd all just forget about it, and that Gaddafi would never release these suspects, and that everyone would say, as one senior, nay, sainted Scottish politician said one night over a glass too many in the presence of journalists, the chances of bringing these two Libyans to trial are nil. The time has come to move on. What's the point if it was the Libyans, or anyone else for that matter? It was all so long ago. This was in September 1997, not even 9 years after the worst terrorist atrocity in post-war British history. Not that long ago, matey. Not when it's your beautiful child who lies dead because of a preventable tragedy. What will help me move on is justice. Truth and justice, all I've ever asked for. I wrote a furious letter to Donald Dewar, for it was he. Received a very apologetic letter back, reassuring me of his and the Lord Advocate's full support for a trial. Yes, very reassuring, thank you. And then in 1998, with the international sanctions regime against Libya just about to fall apart, the UK government came up with a wonderful new idea. A trial under Scottish law in a neutral country. Brilliant! Well, you know, if everyone's going to be queuing up to do business with Gaddafi, we wanted to be head of the line. You know, BP had some pretty important, nifty business for doing that great oil lake of theirs, and at the end of the day, the golden rule of politics, business comes first. Actually, when the trial was announced, Jane and I were having a much-needed holiday, as it turned out, on the Isle of Skye, our beloved Skye, my birthplace, and the place where we always used to bring the children for holidays, all their lives, in fact. You know, so peaceful and tranquil. If you've ever been there, you know what I mean. And there was always something to be done. Chores, you know, winter damage on the boat has to be repaired, and it's here that we come to reconnect with Flora at her graveside, and where I can try and get a bit of sleep and try not to dream. When the trial was announced, BBC News crew rolled up. They were the first, they got the scoop. And it's funny actually how you sometimes find yourself saying things on camera that actually you wouldn't probably say in private. Jane said, well, things have settled down now. We'll have a quiet family holiday. We've got William coming tomorrow afternoon and Jane next week, and Kathy, and so we'll have a quiet holiday. We'll all be with friends, we'll enjoy it, and we'll have a quiet family holiday in peace and quiet, I hope. And the inevitable looking through the photograph album shots, you know, this time enhanced by a recording that I found that I made of Flora when she was 7.
Little baby, good night. Big lilies of white, red roses I spread all over thy bed. When the lark is his nest, God shall wake thee from rest. When the lark is his nest, God shall wake thee.
Flora always wants to know why something happened. You know, why this, why that. So, you know how dads are about their daughters. Well, she was a stunner, wasn't she? Because she had that wonderful Celtic colouring, you know, the dark hair and the blue eyes. And then I suddenly found myself crying, you know, on camera. You know. Jane came to my rescue and she said, I wish I could feel anger. Anger can be a positive thing. It can get you through that terrible gutting sadness, the anguish. Jim felt anger. I envied him his anger. He's always tried not to intrude when we're together with the family, with his campaign, but sometimes, of course, inevitably, it does. And I think Flora would say, now leave off, Dad. You've still got a wife and 2 children. They need you. They need you and your enthusiasm and fun and joy and guts in their lives, not just in a campaign. Excuse me, sir. Just a moment. Hello. Yes, speaking. Yes, of course. Well, we're absolutely delighted. This is what we've been waiting for many years, and I hope at last we can find out the truth of what happened in Lockerbie on the 21st of December 1988. Not at all. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hello. Yes, I remember. Go ahead. Well, we're absolutely over the moon, of course. We've been campaigning for many years for just such a development as this, with the hope that I can at last find out the truth of who killed my lovely daughter Flora. All we've ever, sorry, just one moment, please. Hello, hold the line a moment. All we've ever campaigned for is truth and justice, and now it looks like at last we might be about to get it. Very good. No, that's all. That's fine. No, on holiday. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hello. Oh, well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. Well, obviously, yes, the fight goes on. We're now to monitor the progress of the trial, but we're delighted that these two suspects who the Crown says that they have watertight evidence against will be tried in court, and we will at last find out the truth of how and why our loved ones were killed. Truth and justice is all we've ever asked for. Not at all. Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. How does a man say, I love my daughter so deeply that I found a way to move the world? Anyway, on to the trial. Only another 4 agonizing years after that, but hey-ho, you can't rush justice, can you? So the prosecution's case against these two suspects, it turned out, hung upon 3 magical ingredients. First, something called a star witness, in the form of a Maltese clothing shop owner, Tony Gauci, who had allegedly sold items of clothing to Al-Megrahi on the 23rd of November or the 7th of December 1988. Secondly, another star witness, there are more stars than MGM apparently, this one, Majid Jaka, would give eyewitness testimony of seeing the explosives in Megrahi's desk and of seeing the two plant the bomb at Lucca Airport in Malta. And the third pillar of the prosecution's case was a tiny fragment of timer circuit board. There it is, magnified, that's it right there. Now we'll start with the circuit board actually. I'll try and keep this as brief and simple as I can, bear with me. The whole premise of the story about the timer circuit board fragment is that it was found by an astonishing chance, embedded in a tiny little fragment of shirt collar, buried deep in the Calder Forest, found by a Scottish policeman and then analysed by a forensic scientist, Thomas Hayes, from the Royal Armaments Research and Development Establishment. His finding verified by his colleague Alan Faraday, who soon became head of the laboratory when Thomas Hayes left the profession to become a chiropodist, for reasons I shall come to shortly. Positively identified then by one Thomas Thurman, senior explosives expert at the FBI's Washington labs, who used photographs to match this fragment of circuit board with a type of timer circuit made by a company called Nebo in Switzerland, who then sold such timers to Libya and to the East German Stasi, who had close links with the DFL-PGC, as it happens. Now, the first thing you'd do, I would have thought, if confronted with a fragment of circuit board that you thought might be from a bomb, particularly one that caused such mayhem, death and destruction, your first act would be to test it for explosive residue. See what type of explosives are being used and what quantities, that kind of thing. As much data as you can get your hands on, really. Now, astonishing to me, I don't know what you think, Thomas Hayes never tested the fragment for explosive residue, telling the court, I didn't rule out the possibility of doing tests, I ruled out the work that would be required. Now, I found this absolutely extraordinary, and suffice to say, without time to go into more detail about it, I found Hayes's discovery of the fragment and Thomas Thurman's identification of it as being of Libyan origin tenuous and troubling, to say the least. Now, we'll come back to these guys in a moment, but first I want to look at the first of our star witnesses, Majid Jaka, an ex-Libyan intelligence official who had moved, defected to the United States, where he now lived with his family under new names, new identities, and his face altered by plastic surgery. He told the court that he had witnessed the explosives in Al-Megrahi's desk at his office at Lucca Airport. He had then seen the two, the pair of them, set the timer to 7 p.m., seen them put it into the suitcase, and then plant the suitcase in the luggage train at Luke Airport, Malta, bound for New York via Frankfurt and Heathrow, presumably on the assumption that there would be no delays at all on this very long journey, because after all, the bomb that went off while the plane was still on the ground would be a bit of a damp squib, wouldn't it? Anyway, he seemed like a very credible witness, and I was absolutely delighted. I thought, my God, at last we're getting somewhere. Here is a witness whose testimony seems to prove pretty well conclusively that these two monsters were the ones who murdered my daughter. Very good. So now we turn to our next star witness, Tony Gacci, the aforementioned clothing shop owner, nice enough man, getting on with his life, running his shop in Malta, selling clothing, with the help and hindrance of his excitable younger brother Paul. Now, items of clothing found in the fields around Lockerbie in fragments had been traced directly back to his shop. Now, after 2 years of the Scottish police showing him photographs of suspects, and after Gacci initially positively identifying 3 different men as the suspect, he made his first identification of Al-Megrahi in February 1991. When pressed by the police, this was his statement. Now listen carefully, this is verbatim, this is a positive identification. I would say that the photograph at number 8 is similar to the man who bought the clothing. The hair is perhaps a bit longer, the eyebrows are the same, the nose is the same, and his chin and shape of his face are the same. The man in the photograph, number 8, is, in my opinion, in his 30 years. He would perhaps have to look about 10 years or more older, and he would look like the man who bought the clothes. It's been a long time now. I can only say that this photograph number 8 resembles the man who bought the clothing, but it is younger. I can only say that of all the photographs I have been shown, this photograph number 8 is the only one really similar to the man who bought the clothing, if he was a bit older, other than the one my brother showed me. The photograph his brother showed him was of Abu Tal, who you may remember was the terrorist paid $500,000 by the Iranians in recognition of our greatest strike against the West, and who some people believe may be the man who walked into Gacci's shop that day. He was a admitted terrorist who had told investigators that he had retrieved a bomb from a flat in West Germany used by the PFLP-GC, and that he had been in Malta on the 23rd of November, 1988, one of the 2 days that Gacci said a stranger bought clothing from his shop. Now, I know what you're probably thinking at this point, but we're hunting for Libyans now, so you have to forget about him. Pretend he doesn't exist. Okay, 8 years later, Gacci goes to the police in Malta with a magazine that he's been holding on to for over a month with a photograph of Al-Megrahi, claiming that he is one of the bombers. This is what he's remembered in court at the trial, saying to the policeman. Well, now, I told him, this chap looks like the chap who bought articles from me. Something like that, I told him. I don't remember now. I don't know exactly what I said. His hair and glasses were not like that the day he bought the clothes from me, and he was much shorter than that. And he was without glasses. Okay, so a week later, the police organised an identity parade with Megrahi present. Now remember, this is in 1999, when his face has been all over the internet and newspapers as one of the possible bombers for many, many years. So not surprisingly, perhaps, Gacci picked out number 5, Al-Megrahi, and then said these words to the accompanying officer. Not exactly the man I saw in the shop 10 years ago. I saw him, but the man who looked a little bit like exactly is number 5. That's as close as he ever got to a positive identification, a little bit like exactly. Finally, the final clinching identification before our very eyes in court at capsized. This is verbatim again. This is Prosecution Counsel Campbell to Gacci. Mr. Gacci, I wonder if you would now take a moment to look around this courtroom and tell me if you see the man who bought the clothing in your shop in 1988 in court here today. He's the man on this side. He resembles him a lot. On this side, on my side. And when you say on your side, could you indicate by pointing to the man you were talking about? This side. You are pointing towards the left-hand side? Yes, exactly. Now, I wonder if you could point to the man directly to whom you are referring, please. That gentleman over there. Now, there are a number of rows of people sitting. You can see 3 rows. A row near you, a row in the center, and a row at the back. Which row is the man sitting in? The last row. Do you see police officers sitting in the last row? Yes, yes, next to him. next to the police officer. Now, there are two men sitting between the police officers. Which one are you referring to? Not the dark one, the other one. That is not the dark one, the one next to him. That is the man I see resembles the man who came. You can see that of the two gentlemen sitting between the police officers, one is wearing glasses and one is not wearing glasses. Which is the man you were talking about? The man without glasses. I mean, it's almost funny, isn't it? Well, it's funny if it's not your daughter who was murdered. As it is, I found it absolutely heartbreaking. Because you see, I realized more vividly than ever that these two could not possibly be guilty as charged. Maybe they were involved in some wider plot. I can't honestly tell you that Libya wasn't involved in the plot somewhere along the line. I don't know. The point is, no evidence was ever produced that proved it. And I had absolutely no doubt whatsoever that these two would be acquitted, that we would then have a new investigation, leading to a new trial, and then at last some peace. I mean, peace of mind, you know? Well, obviously, the learned Scottish lords are better judges of character and evidence than I am. Because, as is now very well known, Emer was acquitted, and Al-Megrahi, inexplicably, since the case against him relied entirely upon Fima's participation, was found guilty as charged and sentenced to 20 years in a Scottish prison, later increased to 27 years. And when I heard this word guilty, something very strange happened. I fainted, blacked out, completely dead, on the floor, horrible feelings, sensation. I mean, it was pure shock. And when I came to, really it was to a new world, one in which not only might my daughter be taken away from me in the most horrible way imaginable, but in which the state, Her Majesty's government, was supposed to be there to protect us and look after us and lead us to justice, did everything they could to keep us from the truth. And everything that's come out since about the trial has convinced me, I'm sorry to say, that the trial was nothing more than a massive exercise in cynicism on the part of the Crown. I mean, just look at the quality of the evidence they presented us with. This Time Earth fragment, verified by Thomas Hayes, who we now know was undergoing a parliamentary inquiry at the very time that he discovered this fragment, because of the, quote, false and distorted evidence he and his colleagues provided at the trial of the Maguire 7, who were imprisoned falsely for 14 years. That's why Mr. Hayes left the profession. Forensic science's loss was Chiropodi's gain. Thomas Hayes, discredited. Dr. Faraday, as the Crown liked to refer to him, revealed to the proud owner of a 30-year-old higher national certificate in physics and electronics, now banned from being called as an expert witness because of the dodgy evidence he gave in many miscarriages of justice. So Faraday, discredited. In America, Thomas Thurman, since 1995, banned from entering FBI labs or from being called as an expert witness because of his nasty habit of doctoring evidence. Thurman, discredited. Magic Jacka, the witness who seemed so credible, the only one who saw them with the bomb. Very credible, indeed, until unredacted CIA cables came to light during the trial, one of which read, Jacka will be advised in no uncertain terms on the 4th of September that we will only continue his $1,000 a month salary through to the end of 1989. If Jacka is not able to demonstrate sustained and defined access to information of intelligence value by January 1990, the CIA will cease all salary and financial support until such access can be proven. Again, in other words, he was a paid witness. And his whole family was being threatened with being hung out to dry in the Mediterranean, swarming with intelligence officials from the country he'd betrayed. So his testimony was totally discredited, which leaves only one mighty pillar of the prosecution case, Tony Gouch. Now, not only have we seen his identifications were laughable throughout, but we now know that he is, as we all sit here now, he is in Australia, living with his family under new identities, supported by a cool $2 million of American taxpayers' hard-earned money. His brother Paul was found paying $1 million for not testifying. So Jacka was dismissed as totally unreliable because he was a paid witness, and therefore that surely strikes out Gouchy as well, discredited, leaving the Crown with no case. I mean, it's like a sort of nightmare. When you consider the weight given by the Crown to the evidence of these jokers, and then remember the disdain with which certain defence witnesses were treated, like Mr. Manley, who discovered the break-in at Heathrow the night before the bombing, who only gave evidence at the first appeal when he was very sick. He was not being paid by anyone, he had nothing to gain and plenty to lose by testifying, and when he could stand the supercilious goading of the prosecution counsel no more, he suddenly lost his cool, stood up and shouted, "I just want to say this isn't a comedy house, and it's not a comedy. It's very, very serious, and you may not think so, but I do. I've lived with it for 13 years, and maybe if this had been acted upon at the time, we may not all be sitting here. Now let me have my say, okay? I'm suffering still. I've suffered all this time and the horror of it. And if someone had carried out their jobs and done the job they should have done, it may not have happened. So this isn't a joke. It's very serious, and I want you to take it serious." Because of this outburst, his evidence was dismissed as unreliable. But you see, the man was only saying what I felt like screaming myself from behind the soundproof glass in the observation gallery. When I read in 2005, in the Sunday Times, the words of our old friend, Lord Advocate Peter Fraser, talking to a Sunday Times journalist over a drink, of course, saying Gouchy was not quite the full shilling. I think even his family would say he was an apple short of a picnic. He was quite a tricky guy. I don't think he was deliberately lying, but if you asked him the same question 3 times, he would just get irritated and refuse to answer. You do have to worry. He's a slightly simple chap. Are you putting words into his mouth even if you don't intend to? I mean, what am I supposed to think? I don't know if you've ever heard of a principle called Occam's razor, which posits that the simplest explanation for a thing is usually the correct one. Well, just apply it to this evidence. How many people, looking at the evidence on which Al-Megrahi was convicted, could doubt for 1 second that he was the victim of a serious miscarriage of justice and should never have been in prison in the first place? And given that, and given all the wealth of hard evidence that leads them to the bombing, who can doubt that instead of wearing out our lives, trying to make sense of this rubbish, we should have been going after these guys? I mean, all the effort we went to get this trial, the trips to see Gaddafi, the terror and strain of it all, and the raised expectations that at last we were going to get some kind of truth about what happened to Flora and all the others killed, all for nothing. Just a wild goose chase, a massive diversion. And of course the tragic thing is that if the second appeal had continued, all this evidence would have come out, and the Crown's case against Megrahi would have been revealed for what it was, a cynical sham. As it was, they got rid of the problem by presenting them with a dilemma. Either you return to accept our compassion and return to die with your family as the Lockerbie bomber, or go through another appeal before a discredited judiciary with every possibility that they'll once again ignore the blindingly obvious and send you back to die in prison. I can hardly blame them for accepting the more direct route to freedom. Yeah, and I hate, irritates me enormously when I hear these comments you hear all the time, these cynical comments about the fact that Mr. Megrahi has signally failed to die of cancer. Oh, still alive, I see. The scandal is not that he was released, but that he was ever imprisoned in the first place. Good God! Why should he not live as long as he possibly can? I hope he does. The only place that a man should face the end of his days, in the bosom of his family. And all this hot air from these politicians, Cameron, Obama, Clinton, Salmon, these senators, all of them, they are well aware, in my opinion, that the man was wrongly convicted and they were only too pleased to be shot him and have him off their consciences. So where does that leave us? What's it all been for? As I'm so often asked. Everything I've done has been in the service of pursuing the goal of truth and justice, not only for my lovely daughter, Flora, but for all those killed and affected by our worst ever terrorist atrocity, and simply to do all I can to make sure that such a thing can never happen again. And I will probably go on fighting for these things till the day I die, I suppose, because, you see, I simply can't do anything else. It's in my nature. And yes, it is how I cope with the horror of how my daughter died, and the sad truth. Probably the only certain truth in all of this, which is that I will never ever see her again. I want the people who killed her, who are still at large in the sight of the authorities, to be tried and punished. Because they, and I have to include those in power, with whom I am sorely disillusioned, they stole the lives of 270 innocent people. They stole from me just about the most precious thing I had in the world. They stole her from all the people who would have benefited from knowing her, the children she would have had, the grandchildren I should be playing with now, having a whale at a time. They stole from me the life I knew, and they condemned me to this one. And that I do find extraordinarily distasteful.